I lived in an attic room most of my life, or the part of my life that I care to remember. It was the biggest and the most architecturally beautiful room in the house, with sloping ceilings and plenty of sunlight. And since the room was always too hot or too cold, my claim on the room was accepted after some of my older siblings tried and failed to enjoy the space and isolation that the room allotted. At 13, I spent all of my allowance buying Christmas lights and fabric to adorn my room, making it look like a big, cozy blanket for it. I also had an affinity for candles, although my mother frequently voiced concern about the mix of fabrics and fire. I fancied myself a white witch, burning candles in the arched nook of the bay window and arranging dried flowers and trinkets around in circles marked with chalk I'd actually been given to draw on the concrete walkway outside. I don't remember exactly when the birds started, but I do remember the first one that dove headfirst into the glass, falling out of sight onto the roof of the porch below. I'd fallen asleep near the windows, in a pile of blankets like I often did, and the sun was just starting to rise. I remember the sight of its limp frame in the morning light. I remember the compelling urge to help it, that I would feel many times over. I climbed tentatively out onto the roof, my first time on the roof or assisting an injured animal. I picked the bird up in my hands and I cupped my fingers around it. I blew into my cupped hands as if I was breathing life into it. And as I opened them, the bird got to its feet and stared for a moment before taking flight. For obvious reasons, I never told anybody about these happenings, because I loved my room, and I thought that if anyone found out I was climbing on the roof on a regular basis, I'd be demoted to the spare room downstairs. I wish I had. My cozy room wasn't worth what would happen and how it would destroy my life. Several birds later, things started to happen. I started to find gifts, which I accepted without knowing their cost. I realized far too late that I wasn't helping unconscious birds. I was bringing them back to life, unbreaking their poor, frail necks and coaxing blood through their tiny hearts once more. With each one and each gift, I had indebted myself, little by little, to a greater power. A price that I would have to pay. The first gift was a book, the only kind of book I had ever truly longed for, given my white witch fantasies. I soon realized if I left the book open to a spell, I'd awaken to the materials needed, neatly wrapped in little brown paper parcels outside my window. Part of me wondered if this was my mother's doing. That maybe she was indulging my fantasy, like leaving ashen boot tracks from the chimney on Christmas. I realized it was a pretty intricate indulgence, if so, and she hadn't hinted at anything. But again, I didn't want my roof traversing to jeopardize my bedroom privilege, so I said nothing. The spells in this book, they seemed harmless enough. No alarm bells in my head went off. A 13-year-old, after all, doesn't have many of those to begin with. I did spells for calming energy, inviting kind spirits, and beauty spells. My mother actually remarked on how shiny and thick my hair was looking one day. I left my book open to a love spell. I had a crush on the neighbor down the street that my parents would pay to mow our lawn. The next night, the neatly wrapped parcel contained nothing of what I needed for that spell. It contained a black candle, what looked like a skinny, intricately carved letter opener, a little vial of clear liquid, and a large pouch of ash. The ash made me think back to Christmas Santa footprints. Even a naive 13-year-old would hear alarm bells ringing. I tossed the parcel aside, a little scared. As I did, I noticed a piece of paper, a slightly lighter shade of brown than the parcel's wrappings. Curiosity won. I opened it up and wasn't made to feel less uneasy. The spell on the paper was entirely in another language. Some of the letters were familiar, and then many weren't. The margins, however, had scribbled transcriptions. At the bottom, in red ink, as opposed to the black used for transcribing, it said, "As I have left you many gifts, I need but one favor in return." I felt a pang of guilt. I looked at my little shelf collection of excess ingredients and perfect tiny little bottles and dried herbs tied with pretty ribbon, a few beautiful crystals and geodes. I looked at the top of the page again and read the title's transcription. Bond of Friendship. Could I trust the transcriber? They had given me a lot. So many presents. I mulled it over for a few days, and as I did, there were no more birds, and no more parcels, no matter what spell I left the book open to. I didn't want the gifts to stop coming, but I knew I didn't deserve them. On the third night, I decided to do it. I still felt a rock in the pit of my stomach when I opened up the last parcel. It felt wrong. Different than the other spells. I followed the directions after reading them through a couple times. The last step scared me. It involved pricking my finger with the little knife. I sat cross-legged in my nook for a long while before I used the bag of ash to create an unbroken circle around me and lit the black candle. I held the little vial of clear liquid as I spoke the unfamiliar words, which were nicely transcribed in an easy-to-follow pronunciation form in the margin. As I did, the liquid changed from clear to red. Until this moment, nothing I had done before had any concrete evidence of magic. I screamed and I threw the vial, but a second later it was back in my hand. I threw it 3 more times, to no avail. I began to cry and scream. I got up and I tried to run downstairs, as clearly no one had heard me call for help. As I went to exit the ashen circle, I found myself sitting cross-legged once more, the sudden change in orientation nauseating me. I knew I had no choice. After screaming a few minutes more for good measure, I opened the little vial and pricked my finger and let a droplet of blood fall into the little vial. As the drop of blood hit the surface of what was surely blood as well, it turned black and swirled as it mixed. Crying and unable to see what I was doing, I followed the next step anyway, and I held the vial over the black candle, tears pouring relentlessly. I couldn't see, but I could feel the liquid boil almost instantly, though the vial itself remained cool, and everything went black. I awoke cross-legged in the ashen circle, though it was now wafted about the nook. The window was open in front of me, and I could see the sun was beginning to rise. My mind, from that day on, would be inhabited by a parasite. It explained all I had done to get here, and how only a witch's blood could invite it. It explained how every task had led me down this path. It would control me as it wished. It would take control as I watched through what seemed a darkened corridor, but only if it wished me to see. Other times, I was entirely blind, deaf, or both, as it saw fit. It would let me hear screaming or the sound of flesh being mutilated by my own hands, to inspire more fear than being allowed the sight of whatever it was. When I was in control of my own again, it was only to torment me. to put me in a position. The third night, it allowed me to resurface. I awoke in a way to what was once my family home. It was now a pile of ash, burned to the ground, and I was naked and unharmed, laying right in the center of its ruin. I heard fire trucks and the sound of people gathered around talking. As I sat up, gasps came from every direction. Policemen demanded answers to questions.